Hinamam Herimba. I'm Tara Gatewood, and I am the director of the Fund for Indigenous Journalists, reporting on missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, and transgender people. And I am coming to you from Xiuhuptli, my home community of Isleta Pueblo, and we have a very special time planned together today. It is my honor to be on the line right here with Connie Walker, who is a Pulitzer Prize and Peabody Award-winning investigative journalist and host of the acclaimed podcast Stolen. Her work has exposed the crisis of violence in Indigenous communities and the devastating impacts of intergenerational trauma stemming from Indian residential schools in Canada and the US. And Connie is a member of the Okonese First Nation in Saskatchewan, and she lives with her family in Toronto. And so, Connie, my honor to be here with you. I just want to welcome you into this space, and please feel free to jump into this space however you would like to.
Thank you very much. I'm so honored to be here, and so grateful, Tara, to be in conversation with you. The support from the IWMF of our podcast was really instrumental in this latest season, and yeah, I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. We just finished the season 3 of Stolen, and I always say that like it's such a weird time following the end of a season because for my team and I, we've spent months and months, like, over a year and a bit working on this story. But once it's published, kind of the internal infrastructure to be as invested as we are in it kind of disappears along with everything else. And so, but our interest doesn't disappear, and our passion for this story and these broader stories and Stolen as a whole doesn't disappear. And so I'm always so grateful to have more opportunities to talk about our work and to bring people behind the scenes as much as I can, and really, really excited that people have joined in today to hear more about it.
Indeed. And Connie, I'm sure we have a mixed audience in front of us today and would love to just provide a little bit of context for our time together as well as the work that you're doing. And so we have Connie with us today, but you can also participate if there are questions that you have specifically for Connie. We do encourage you to go ahead and post those, and we'll be weaving in as many as possible before our time is up today. And Connie is one of our grantees here with the Fund for Indigenous Journalists. And I think at the heart of this program, Connie, is really giving the opportunity for Indigenous voices to be at the lead, to be able to make those necessary decisions that need to happen, and from an Indigenous mind and heart. And so many times we know there are so many Indigenous journalists that we stand on the shoulders of that have really pushed forward to make sure opportunities like this exist, and in some really intense situations and maybe even life-threatening moments, who fought and stood there as their hair was being pulled, as they were being pushed and told, you cannot interview non-Indigenous people. So we come from a very strong legacy of Indigenous journalists who bring us to this point. So the responsibility of us as Indigenous journalists today, it's heavy. And when we do the kind of reporting that we do, it is more than a story. This is a part of our history. This is a part of our legacy. And when it comes specifically to the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous people, we are talking about a stolen history, and so fitting the way you have named your podcast. But to give a little more context into the intensity of what we're talking about, please, if there's anything you would like to share about just the importance and the need for more coverage and understanding about the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous people.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, what's happened in Canada, honestly, over the last 10 years, but maybe even, the last, yeah, five to 10 years has really been, I think, a good example of not only being able to show how important these stories are, but also how transformative it's been to have more Indigenous journalists being empowered to help tell our own stories. Because I think exactly what you said, that, for me personally, and I think for so many other Indigenous journalists, this is more than our job, or this is more than work we do from 9 to 5. I feel like, I can speak for myself in saying that, so much of this work feels like a continuation of my greater responsibility as, a Cree woman, as a First Nations woman, and that, I'm compelled to want to do this for, obviously, like, all of the reasons that journalists do this work for our society, for democracy, but also I think for myself and for my family and my community. And I think that even though season 3 is obviously focused on the Navajo Nation, and season 2 of Stolen was a personal story. Season 1 was a story about a woman named Germaine Charlo, a Bitterroot Salish woman from Missoula, just outside of Missoula, Montana. I think that we have these kinds of distinct and diverse communities that we represent, but I think that as Indigenous people in Canada and the US, like, we have so many shared experiences through colonization and through surviving genocide that I think have been ignored for far too long, and are, even though it's changing, like I said, in Canada in the last 5 to 10 years, and that's such an improvement, there's still so much that you know that have is yet to be uncovered about not just our history but our present, like what is happening in our communities today that is critical and relevant, that is so important for us to help share and to help shine a spotlight on. And that's something I think that you know I'm committed to doing in some way, shape, or form, um moving forward. Oh, I can't hear you.
I think moving forward is a real fitting way to take us into what exactly you have brought to the world. And if you're just joining us, we're here with Connie Walker, and she is giving us a view into her project Stolen. And hello to those. It looks like we got people from around the globe. Hello from DC, Ontario, Ireland, Mexico City, New Mexico, Oregon. So we're connecting spaces, Connie. And that really
That's it.
excites me because this issue is really about connecting people. And I think I will be a very happy woman when every newsroom considers the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women as a priority for their newsroom, every single newsroom. And so, Connie, go ahead and set the scene for us. What is Stolen about, and what is it that set you on this journey?
Well, Stolen was very much a continuation of work that I started when I was at the CBC in Canada, with the podcast Missing and Murdered. And each season is an investigative podcast that is a deep dive into usually a single case, as a way to kind of bring people into an Indigenous community, into really a world that they were maybe didn't know very much about. And it's a way, I think, for us to raise awareness about these critical issues like violence against Indigenous women and girls and men and boys, but also a way to help provide that context that you were talking about, to connect the dots for people, to help us all understand the truth about our shared history, in Canada and in the United States. And season 3, I think, was a continuation of that bigger goal. Season 2, I don't know how many people here. I do recognize some names here, so thank you all so much for joining us. But season 2 was such a personal story for me. Surviving St. Michael's was, you know, a story really about me and my dad. And, my journey to try to better understand how his experience at a residential school in Canada shaped, the father that he was to me. And I think that because that was such a personal story for season 3, I was really like deliberately wanting to do something different than season 2, and to explore a community that maybe where I hadn't spent very much time. And I think also for our team at the time, we were also thinking of our show, kind of taking a wider view and thinking about, like, even with Missing and Murdered, we had covered a lot about obviously residential schools in Canada. We had talked about the 60 Scoop with Finding Cleo. We had talked about intimate partner violence a lot with Stolen season 1, the disappearance of Jermaine Charlo. And we really were thinking about the context pieces and what we wanted to explore. And we decided that we wanted to take on a more kind of contemporary story. So as opposed to historical, and so do a more contemporary investigation. And initially, I think we had actually thought about trying to focus on a place that was urban more than rural. In the end, though, we ended up hearing, honestly, like the thing that kind of brought me into this story was hearing about the disappearance of Ella Mae Begay, a Navajo elder who went missing in a couple of years ago in her home community of Sweetwater, Arizona. And when I heard about Ella Mae's disappearance, I think that it stood out to me for a number of reasons, but the first really being the circumstances of her disappearance, that she was at home in her community on the Navajo Nation, and just appeared to have kind of, vanished from her home one night. And I say in the podcast, but, I say it because it's true, that like, it really made me think of elders in my community who live alone, and about their vulnerability. And I think that is something, just seeing Ella Mae's photo was really something that drew me personally to wanting to know more about not just her disappearance, but what was happening in her community that led to this. And that's really the beginning of what brought us to the Navajo Nation and to the story Trouble in Sweetwater.
Mm-hmm. Well, Connie, let's give them a little bit of some of your journey with this season 3.
It's just so big, so much land, so many ways to like hide things. On the Navajo Nation, desert and red rock unspool in every direction. It's a place where people can easily disappear.
Money is not gonna get anybody to talk here.
That place really got bad at nighttime. Gunshots just turned into the wild, wild west.
Those guys know something. I just think they're afraid to say it.
You're not a cop, are you, right?
I came here looking for answers after a Diné elder vanished in the dead of night.
My first instinct is, what do you mean she's missing? She doesn't just go missing. She just doesn't go leave and not say anything.
But I soon found something else. A tangled web of violence and retaliation.
It's survival out there, that's what it is. It's about survival.
Look around, you never know what you're gonna find, because there's a lot of killing going on in this area.
People know you can get away with murder out there.
Here, seeking justice can mean taking matters into your own hands.
Around here, the aunties get shit done. We go places where people don't want to go.
Families who are like, I know who did it, and police aren't doing anything, and I could easily go over there and just get rid of him myself.
Do you know where he's at?
Are you saying that he's someone that you're interested in talking to?
Yes. Do you know where he's at?
I just want to be ready to go in case something bad happens.
There's a car coming.
We're not talking to you.
Then he comes back and goes, Auntie, come with me, I'll show you something.
As I got closer, I seen, the 2 eye sockets, the teeth and everything, and then you could tell it was a human skull.
I'm Connie Walker. This is Stolen, Trouble in Sweetwater, coming March 5th.
You guys are really going to open up something that's been secret for a long time. You're going to make people mad. You're going to ruffle up feathers. But you know what? I think it needs to be done.
Follow and listen for free on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.
And Connie, just hearing that, I know that is a short trailer of your journey with this particular season, but what are you feeling hearing those voices and, long stories about every voice that we just heard? What are you feeling right now, just hearing all of that together once again?
I mean, I honestly, I was feeling like, oh, it's so dramatic. And I guess that is the nature of making trailers, is that you're really trying to get people engaged in the story, but it just feels like so dramatic. Whenever we are about to publish this season, I always tell people like who are in the story that like just to try to warn them that like the trailer is like inherently dramatic, but obviously the podcast will be more in depth and provide more of the context. But I think that just in hearing some of those voices again of people that we talked to, I think that one of the things that I've been left with after this season is really just kind of being in awe of the women, some of the women that we met who are doing the really difficult work of advocating sometimes for their loved one who is missing, or who has had been killed, but also people like Bernadine Biel, who is just but is a volunteer who works with families of people in the Navajo Nation, families who have loved ones who are missing. And this is something that she does like outside of her regular job, that she just, she told us, how she kind of got into this in kind of, an interesting and surprising way. But now she's become kind of this critical lifeline for so many families in the community who feel like they have nowhere else to turn to for support. And I think, that's also something that I'm thinking of, just the number of people that we met who felt like they didn't have the support that they needed for, to help find their missing loved ones, or to help investigate things that needed to be investigated, and really just, grateful for the opportunity to help amplify some of their voices and share some of their stories.
Indeed. And we know how important it is to say their name, to remember them, and to make sure their truth is being spoken. And thinking of the two individuals that you were bringing a huge spotlight to, Connie, what would you like to say about those two individuals that you are really asking critical questions about their disappearance, about the importance of their life and how that connects to the community, please?
Well, with LMA, it was really, I think, her family that did the work of raising awareness about her disappearance. Like, her son Gerald, her niece Seraphine Warren, almost like from the very beginning, had been advocating for LMA and going to kind of extraordinary lengths long before we got involved in any way, to try to not just raise awareness about her disappearance and to find LMA, but I think also to try to seek accountability, from law enforcement, from Navajo Nation leadership. And, we talk a lot in the podcast, and we talked to Gerald and we talked to Seraphine, and Seraphine is, went as far to walk from the Navajo Nation to Washington, D.C. And she told us that it was after her aunt went missing, when Gabby Petito went missing, and I don't know how many people remember Gabby Petito, but she was a woman who went missing, and I remember that case as well because it was not long after we published season 1 of Stolen, which focused on the disappearance of Jermaine Charlo, and I remember Gabby because I remember like the similarities between her and Jermaine in that they were both these like young women who had gone missing, but who were very, very active on social media. And that was initially one of the first red flags for everyone, was that they had both stopped posting. And Jermaine's case, you know, at that point had been a couple of years old before we did our podcast. But the way that Gabby's case kind of just like immediately kind of just seemed to you know, be known to everyone everywhere and was national news, and there was this kind of search for her that was so active and involved like multiple law enforcement agencies across different states in the United States, and just that level of coordination and effort that was put into finding her and to finding answers. And unfortunately, you know, it was another tragic story when she was found that she had been killed. But it just, you know, again highlighted to me the differences in terms of how cases of Indigenous women are not always given the same attention or ever given the same attention. And Seraphine saw that, you know, after her aunt went missing, when Gabby went missing, she thought, if enough people heard about my aunt's disappearance, then they would care too in the same way that I care, and that they would then try to help, like that would basically, you know, mean more resources and more support for finding LMA. And that's what led her to take those extraordinary steps and walk from the Navajo Nation to Washington, D.C. And so, you know, I think that I definitely, you know, our podcast was really trying to take, again, like a critical look at the investigation into her disappearance. But really, I want to acknowledge like all of the work that her family had already done up until that point to really push for justice for LMA and for accountability as well. And I think that one thing that was really like surprising to me when we started looking into LMA's case was how quickly then we began to see the crisis in policing and how that affected not just the investigation into her disappearance, but how that was affecting every you know, missing persons case on the Navajo Nation and in the Shiprock district in particular, but also how it was affecting, you know, everyday life for families and communities even before anyone went missing. And that, I think, was something that then naturally led us to wanting to better understand this crisis in policing and how it was intersecting with this crisis of violence. And led us to spending some time with the Navajo police. And that was something that like I had never done before, in terms of getting to spend that amount of time and access with the Navajo police. But it ultimately led us to realizing and recognizing that in some ways, even though it was still unsolved, like LMA's case had gotten quite a bit of attention from law enforcement. Like every person we talked to talked about how extraordinary it was that, you know, people, their days off were canceled and that dispatchers actually went out to search, that everybody seemed to kind of come together to try to find LMA, and that was really unique. And so it made us think about what are the other cases in this community that aren't getting that level of attention, what's happening with those cases. And that's how we came to the disappearance of Christina Carrillo. And again, I want to acknowledge like Christina's family, and in particular her sister Denise, who has taken up kind of, you know, the role of advocating for her sister who is still missing, who you know, by all accounts didn't get, you know, even a fraction of the attention from the Navajo police that LMA's case got. And so, you know, I think although, you know, the series is focused on these two women and their families and their disappearances, it's really also trying to help illustrate and underscore the other crises that exacerbate the crisis of violence and the crisis of missing people here on the Navajo Nation.
Mm-hmm. And something you came to terms with, and you even say this in the podcast, of how do we choose who we cover? And I think that was a very, okay, journalist nerd alert. That was a really exciting moment of thinking and turning that introspection on of why do we do what we do, what attracts us to what we do, especially as a journalist. And that really moved me when you shared those comments about why we pursue what we do as journalists, the type of cases we go after. You said it much better, and I don't want to steal your words or put anything there, but take us back to that moment and why that it is such an important thing for journalists to ask themselves about why am I doing why I'm doing, and why am I taking the view that I am.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I feel like that's a question that I think Indigenous journalists are often asking of our colleagues in mainstream newsrooms. I think that like I remember asking that myself, like the first time I thought about becoming a journalist, and it was because of the disappearance, or sorry, the death of Pamela George, a young Indigenous woman in Saskatchewan, when I was from the Sakamay First Nation, and I remember, being so upset as a teenager by the way she was talked about in the media, and how much it differed from the way that the two white men on trial were talked about. Like, they were called, one was a basketball star, the other was a hockey standout, and she was labeled as a prostitute. And that was, there was so much focus only on that part of her life. And I didn't see any coverage of, or much coverage around the fact that she was a mother, a single mom who struggled to raise her family. She was a daughter, a sister, an auntie. And I think that, like, it's really a question of like who we can easily have empathy for. And even with, so I think that there's so many examples actually in mainstream media. Again, Gabby Petito is a great example. Like, people can instantly care about her because they see themselves in her, because she was a white woman who went missing. And I think that so much of our work has been trying to like ask those critical questions about Indigenous people, and like using the podcast as a way to kind of break down those stereotypes and create a space so that we can have empathy for Jermaine Charlo or Alame Begay or Cleosa Maginnis, because it's not a revelation to know that cases of missing Indigenous people don't get the same level of attention as other cases. But then what I think happened there was then, I just finished talking about why Ella Mae's disappearance grabbed me, like that. It was like, oh, I thought about elders in my family, and I immediately was like worried about them and could have so much empathy and understanding for them. And then I think, when we went out there and started, it was actually a moment with the police when we were spending time in the police station, when we were just asking kind of general questions about missing people in the Shiprock district, which is the Navajo Nation district that we were focused on. And we asked one of the officers about missing people in the Shiprock district, and he said some kind of, it seemed like a really kind of off the cuff remark, and I don't want to, single out him too much, but he said something like, well, we all know about the two important cases in the district, and he was talking about Ella Mae's case and the case of another woman named Brunelle Rose Bennett, who actually went missing on the same day as Ella Mae Begay. And it was, again, like, it made me think of like, why are some cases prioritized over others? If it was true what he was saying, why are some important, and does that mean that others are less important? And then it was like continually turning that reflection on myself, like, why was it like, why have I I chosen to investigate cases like Germain's or Cleo's over others. And it really was like a moment of like, I think for me and my team, thinking about like, why are we making the same decisions? Like what cases are we missing out on if we are, having some kind of bias that leads us to more easily have empathy for someone like LMA. And I think that is part of our work as journalists, is to really kind of try to examine how our own like experiences are affecting our decisions. Because I think, like, not to again just totally nerd out on journalism, but like we have this idea or this myth of like objectivity in journalism, and how like we have to be objective, but the reality is that everything we do is subjective. Like every decision we make around writing, but even like who we decide to interview, and like we're using so much of our own selves to make those decisions, and really wanting to look at that as critically as we can and to be as transparent about that as we can. That's another thing I love about podcasting, honestly, is that you can like talk about that and have that kind of peel back the curtain and have those be part of it. So it's not at all to like point fingers at other people and say like, oh, everyone has done this wrong, but really I think helping myself even understand like why am I choosing certain stories, and also really then trying to take it a step further and like what are the consequences of that. And one of the examples we give is the Vancouver, like the downtown east side of Vancouver, British Columbia, and the dozens of women who went missing from the downtown east side in the like 1990s and early 2000s, and the inquiry, I read that inquiry report again, that really pointed specifically to the fact that like they were forsaken by police, absolutely, but also by society, that was also that we were complicit in letting that happen, and wanting to and I don't think wanting to point that out as well.
Mm-hmm. And this is really huge because I believe that this is part of the reason why so many things get under the rug. And I'll just put it out there. A lot of victim blaming goes on. A lot of conversations I've heard from journalists or even Indigenous journalists who are trying to bring these issues forward, where somebody has a quote unquote checkered past, or somebody has different run-ins with the police and they have a record, and so they are viewed as unstable, and their missing could bring bad press for an organization. And this is the reason that I've heard from different journalists that why editors say, no, that one's a little bit too sticky, let's just go with something that's a little more clear. That's something I really applaud about what you and your team did with this current season of taking on an individual. And you talk about that checkered past. You give a moment for Christina Carrillo to be a person with her beauty and flaws, and go beyond that she becomes just this label. And I think that is so many times the missed point when we are talking about this issue of missing and murdered Indigenous people. So to push beyond that and talk about it, I think that's something that I really applaud, that after listening, and by the way, folks, the entire season is available. So set aside several hours, because it really deserves that moment in your life to be able to listen and see this journey, or experience part of this journey that Connie put you on. But thinking about that, of how many times these stories are missed because somebody has a checkered past. I think something too, and you really go into this in the second season, and kudos to you for opening up your life as well I can only imagine how trying that was for you, and wish you the best in your own personal healing from opening up that story and sharing it with the world, but also taking a moment to give understanding that there are systemic issues that lead to people to the places that they are, that put them in that checkered past or questionable lifestyle, and really unfolding that. I think that truly is something that is missed. And I'm always excited when we have grantees who are applying to the fund and they want to hyper focus in on the systemic issues to show this is what leads to this. And it's not easy to do. And kudos to journalists. If you're relating to this and a genre that you are connected to, or maybe even another culture that you're working on, but if you're seeing similarities, I think that's something really important to take away from this conversation as well. And by the way, if you would like to ask a question of Connie, I really encourage you to jump into the Q&A section and post your questions there. But Connie, before we open it up to those questions, another riveting moment in the podcast, you give a statistic of somebody who was doing an analysis, or a group that was doing analysis of the reality of policing on the Navajo Nation. And they gave out a figure that it takes 500 to 700 law enforcement to actually be able to do what needs to get done. And you compare that, you compare that to how many people were on the beat, and that was 3 people. So 3 people versus a needed 700. That is huge. And there's so much that you have brought us in this podcast, and especially talking about working with law enforcement. And so, is there anything you want to share? Because that is hard. You have cracked a shell that many have yet to. You were riding along with the police, they knew you, you had a relationship, you hear it in the podcast. Is there anything you'd like to share? And I think this kind of goes to one of our viewers' questions, asking about the issues that you experience with police or tribal officials while working on this story. So please open up that side, because this is an important, I'm going to call it history, because we have not seen a view like this into the way things work. We've heard of it, and you've taken that step to give us the details and show us in real time.
Yeah, no, that was honestly like so enlightening for me as well, to get a better sense of what it is like, for the Navajo tribal police on the Navajo Nation. I think that actually was a study that they had commissioned, because I think that the police were trying to, I think, as always, advocate for more resources to do the work that they need to do. And so the study that they had commissioned found that, I think they analyzed the number of calls that come in across all of the districts in the Navajo Nation every year, and found that in order for, them to do the most basic functions of police work, which are respond to the calls that come in and do like an initial kind of investigation to help resolve some of those calls that are coming in, that it would take between 500 and 700 officers. And at the time when we were interviewing the chief of police and he told us that, he said that they had about 150 patrol officers on duty. So that is obviously like a huge discrepancy between like what they need, in his words, to do the most basic functions of police work, and the resources that they have. And that's why they're in a situation like what we were in on that ride along, where there were 3 officers on a shift covering I can't remember, and I'm Canadian, so I always got the yards and state sizes confused me. I think it was the size of Connecticut, like, so this giant area in the Shiprock district with 3 officers. And we spent other like shifts, with dispatchers, where we actually got to see the other side of it. So people are calling in to the dispatchers and asking for help because there's an assault happening at their home or in their outside of their house, and they need assistance, or something else has happened, and like been there listening to the dispatchers say, like, we don't have any officers available right now, like, I'll tell the sergeant, but this is the reality that they're dealing with. And I mean, that is actually something that we didn't get to spend a lot of time on in the podcast, but the dispatchers who are working in that district, like, it was kind of, we were there one shift that they call the swing shift, and that is, I think, from 4 p.m. till midnight. And that was like such a busy time. And I remember the dispatcher, Renee Fraser, who was actually Officer Fraser's partner, like, it just was like, she was just, the phone just keeps ringing off the hook, and she was like, Sherbrooke Police, how can I help you? Sherbrooke Police, how can I help you? And she was just, like, doing the most incredible multitasking, and then talking with the police officers and trying to, again, get them GPS coordinates, because as we mentioned in the podcast, like, they might know they're going to Sweetwater, but they don't know where the house is in Sweetwater, and they don't have street names or addresses. And so they're saying, go to this mile marker on the road and they look for the house with the blue roof, or, they were using satellite imagery to try to pinpoint where these calls are for the officers who are trying to respond to emergencies sometimes. So I think that so much of our work is about, like, seeking accountability, especially when it comes to missing or murdered Indigenous people. And this was really trying to take it a step further and explain, like, I think that often we're seeking accountability from law enforcement. Why didn't you investigate, the people who went missing here? Or why did, this happen in this investigation? And I think that this was our way of really trying to look at the other side of that, and what are the challenges of this tribal police force, which, in many ways I think is unique in that it is kind of a community policing model where, most of the members of the Navajo Nation Tribal Police are Navajo Nation members, who live in the community and who care about their community. And we absolutely saw that, like, kind of deep commitment from officers and dispatchers that we spent time with. But it also, we wanted to help, like, show the truth and the reality of what they're dealing with as well. And we talk a lot about, like, their fear of policing in this community, and the fact that they have received threats to themselves and their family. We spoke to one criminal investigator who told us, he was home with his family when people started shooting at their house, and his kids were, one of the bullets went into his child's bedroom. And another officer who had an escape, like, route planned for their children because they had been broken in before and they'd had to escape out a window. Like, these are the realities that the police officers are also living in this community, and wanting to, I think that's a big part of this story as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think when we think of everything that you've brought up, and somebody listening to this, it can come across as extremely shocking with how many elements that people have to face.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you think about it, and you think about it from an Indigenous context, and being an Indigenous person, this is our reality. This is the world we live in. And what may seem shocking to you is something we've been witness to. And I think that's a really huge thing to consider when you are listening to this, that this is a snapshot of hundreds of communities throughout the US and Canada. And this is how much the story has been missed. If this is the first time you're hearing something like this, and you didn't know things like this existed in our Indigenous communities, you've been missing the story. Huge point to think about. And I do want to go to another question, Connie. We have Luella, who wants to know, how do you care for yourself and your team when working on these difficult stories?
Hi, Luella. That's a great question. I think that like, to do that, like, I've been so lucky, and I'm so glad you brought up our team, because I've been so lucky to work with, like, such an incredible team on Stolen. And, like, like now a lot of us have been working together for years, doing our podcast, but also, doing this kind of reporting. And I think like a big part of it for us, honestly, is the trust that develops amongst our team. And I think that's really important, I think, in this kind of reporting as well. And so wanting to obviously like try to support one another as best we can. But and sometimes that means like, somebody needs to like just take a bit of a breather, and things can get really intense. Take a bit of a breather and spend some time with their family, or do just take a bit of time away. And that's something that I think we all have done at various points. I feel like personally, like I have I feel like so much of my own strategies around doing this kind of work are really like intertwined with the work, and I think I talked about this quite a lot, but in 2019 I attended the Dart Center for Trauma and Journalism at Columbia University. They have a fellowship called the Awkward Fellowship. And that was an incredible resource for me as a journalist, because it was essentially like about a week-long education on the impacts of trauma, and trying to learn about strategies to be trauma informed in our work with, in our stories, but also strategies for helping us to navigate the trauma that we encounter in doing this work. And I think that, like, as an Indigenous woman who has this lived experience, who if you listen to the podcast, you understand my own personal experience with trauma. That learning about it has been actually a really big part of helping to heal from it. But at various points, like, I've spoken to therapists that are specific to do work around trauma therapy specifically, and that has been immensely helpful. I also, I'm really lucky to have such a supportive family. I feel like, again, they're like my motivation, but also my, like, part of my strength. And I'm really grateful to have that. I also do a ton of crafts. Like that is something like that I just do almost every day. Is like a way of kind of de-stressing and just like, that's kind of my happy place, is like I'm knitting or sewing or, doing pottery. I always have to kind of have something on the go. That's something that I do a lot. But the Dart Center for Trauma and Journalism, I think, has a lot of great resources for journalists.
Indeed. And making sure that we are whole is really important. And that's something that we truly do hold as a priority here at IWMF. And we have put out a significant amount of work on mental health care for journalists, as well as providing funding, availability, and also funding so that people can receive the things that they need for trauma care. And definitely, you can learn more about this on IWMF's website, which is simply IWMF.org. And Connie, there was a comment that kind of echoed a little bit about just a situation and what you put a spotlight on. And they're putting in there to remind us that the HBO docuseries on the Navajo Nation police recruits, that this the person who's commenting, Nicole, says that it really shows what you're talking about. So even more follow-up as to what this means. And another question that came to us from Saorsi, asking about, were you ever afraid of repercussions from state police, or even on the Navajo Nation police? And that word retaliation, you spend a lot of time exploring that as well. Anything you want to add, Connie?
I mean, I guess the one thing that I want to say is that, like, I think because I'm not Dene and I'm not from the Navajo Nation, and nobody on our team was, like, I think that was something that as a team we were hypersensitive to, because we were hearing from people who live there, some of those realities that they live with, that's shown in the documentary that they talk about on our podcast. But we, like, because I feel like as a Indigenous woman, you know, I've seen how harmful it can be when other people, other journalists come into a community that's not their own and report on a story that it's sensationalized in some way or inaccurate. And I think that we were really trying to be you know, as responsible as we could be. And we worked with a local journalist, Sunny Clutches Trilogy, and are so grateful to her and to others who like advised us in this reporting, because we wanted to make sure that we were getting it right and that this was something that was you know, an accurate reflection of some of the realities in the community. And our podcast, just by its nature, very much focuses on kind of the criminal justice issues in a community. And so yeah, absolutely. Like, I think that this is one story, but there are others out there. And I think, you know, as much as we can, like, you know, we should all be, you know, supporting journalists who are from their own communities to report on their stories. And I saw Nicole had said something, and now I've lost it, but if people want to connect after this webinar, I'm maybe too active on social media. Like I'm on Instagram a lot, so feel free to send me a message there. Also on Twitter or X or Facebook. So there's lots of ways to get in touch, and I'd be happy to chat more.
And fangirl moment, yes, Sunny Clutch is Chiligi, a very amazing journalist, and her commitment to covering her own nation. And Connie, what's a lesson that Sunny brought to your life that's going to live with you forever?
I mean, I think that it was really like, I think there were so many insightful things about like her own teachings from her community. And I think that really, like, there were some surprising things in the podcast that we were you know, oh, this, you know, this seems really remarkable, and she was like, and she was just like, oh no, that's actually not, you know, that's quite common, or, you know, she just helped give that kind of context and perspective that obviously somebody who is from a community who lives there just knows, because they know it. And I think that, you know, there's so many teachings that she told us about the Carrizo Mountains and the land, but also, you know, the things that she told us about rug hooking and how that, or not rug hooking, sorry, weaving, and how, like, the kind of cultural significance of that in relation to LMA specifically was really just, you know, so helpful, I think, for us in telling this story. So I'm so grateful to her for everything. And she is, yeah, just really, really talented and smart and warm and generous person. So I'm really grateful that we got a chance to work together. And Connor Chi also is a Dene composer who helped write music for the series, and he's fantastic and talented as well. So I encourage everyone to check out his work too.
And so many times when we talk about healthier relationships within the media or creating a healthy journalistic ecosystem, we're often talking about journalists teaming up with Indigenous people. And I think this even goes to that second layer of even Indigenous people connecting with the Indigenous people of the community, because we know that each individual is not an ambassador for the millions of Indigenous voices that exist out there. And maybe something just to take note of when you do connect in that way, how much richer the story can be. And it saves you from stepping into territory that is just not necessary. I do want to take another question coming to us from our audience. They are asking, what would you recommend to early career journalists who want to follow in your footsteps? And when are you writing your book? No, I'd say that one, but go ahead.
Yeah, you know, I want to acknowledge, like, actually what like a difficult time it is right now in journalism in general, but specifically in podcasting. The last year has been incredibly challenging. The company that I was working for, Gimlet Media, essentially has closed, and our podcast has been canceled. And so this is The season 3 is the last season of Stolen with Spotify. We are looking for a new home for our show and are hopeful and keeping our fingers crossed that we'll be able to continue this work in audio in some way. But I know that, it is like a really challenging time now across Canada and across the United States in terms of journalism. But I think that one thing that, I think this the impact that we've been able to have with Stolen for me is really just an proof of the recognition of how important it is to have Indigenous journalists telling our own stories. And I think this momentum that has been building both in Canada and in the United States around wanting to know and understand the truth about Indigenous communities and Indigenous history in both of our countries is momentum that is only going to continue to build. And so I think specifically for Indigenous journalists, our voices and our lived experiences are more valuable than ever. And so, I think one way that I have been able to, I think, survive in this industry has really been by continually adapting. And, I started out as an intern and then I worked in children's and youth, and then I was in mostly news and current affairs, but in digital, radio, TV. I even did some lifestyle and documentary at some point before getting into podcasting. And so I think, trying to be flexible and adapt, but also trying to be true to yourself and the stories, I think, try to trust in yourself that the stories that you care about and that you believe in, are important, and that your inner instinct in that, if it's interesting to you, you can also make it interesting to your audience. And I think the belief that our stories didn't matter or that people didn't care about them, is so far behind us now. And I think we just really need to forge ahead. And so I don't know what my future looks like exactly at this point, but I know that there are so many more stories to tell, and whatever shape they take, I'm committed to continuing this work in some way.
Mm-hmm. Unplotted futures equal millions of opportunities. We definitely wish you the best as you move forward. And I think definitely something that we really want to concentrate on is the story doesn't end. These women are still missing, along with hundreds, thousands of other Indigenous women that are still missing, and the story continues. There's even a court date coming up this May that I know you're going to be keeping your eyes on, and I do look forward to however you choose to inform us about that. And this issue is so large that I think if we really got to my big dream of every newsroom seeing this as a priority, we still would not even be brushing off the tip of the iceberg on a lot of this. And it's
absolutely.
Really important that this type of coverage continues to happen. And I think that just brings me joy knowing that what we're doing here at the IWMF is encouraging journalists to do this kind of work, specifically with the Fund for Indigenous Journalists, where we are providing grant opportunities to Indigenous journalists to jump deeper into this issue of missing and murdered Indigenous people. And many of the other funding that goes on here at the International Women's Media Foundation supports journalists of any walk of life for different reasons. And so do encourage you to check out our website, IWMF.org, for this. And Connie, I definitely want to make sure people know where to find the podcasts. And if there's just anything you would like to say, maybe even to the families who make up the people that we concentrate on, or the families that have yet to tell their story, because nobody is reaching out, nobody's listening.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the another thing that is happening right now is also kind of these networks of Indigenous journalists supporting one another. And that's something I think that is so encouraging. So absolutely, I think that, there are lots of ways to reach journalists, myself included, but I feel like, taking that step and reaching out is really important. And, I'm absolutely open to helping in any way that I can with other Indigenous journalists or families that are looking, to help share their stories. Yeah, no, and I just want to thank everyone who joined today. Honestly, like I said, it's always, such a thrill for me to get a chance to talk a little bit more about our work and to connect with our audience. I love that so much. And I'm honestly just always so grateful that people are listening and sharing our stories. Even though we're leaving Spotify, like our show, all of our previous podcasts will remain on Spotify or Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. Like our archives will stay there. And I have a website that people can visit and sign up for any updates, and I'll be sure to keep people posted once I figure out exactly what I'm going to be doing next.
Connie, we appreciate your time, and thank you to everybody who had a chance to tune in to this live moment with Connie Walker, Okonee's First Nation journalist. It is our privilege and honor, and we look forward to everything that you bring forward, and also look forward to everything that was inspired in this time together, and what others will take what they heard today and what they will do and how they will bring better things to our Indigenous circles. Thank you to everybody for being here with us. And just a reminder, if you are finding this in the archives, you can still reach out to the IWMF. Visit our website, IWMF.org, where you can learn about more funding opportunities, including the Fund for Indigenous Journalists, reporting on missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, and transgender people. I look forward to seeing what everybody takes away from this moment, reading your stories, and I'm ready for more people to understand how important this issue is, and wish you a lot of encouragement. There is not enough encouragement that goes off to the people who do this kind of work and in the kind of situations that they are. What we do in our own newsrooms connects to what everybody does. And here at IWMF, we know it connects around the world. So just from me to you personally, wishing you a lot of strength and just reminding you that the work you are doing matters, and the work that you are doing is bringing truth forward. So thank you to everybody for connecting with us. Connie, we wish you well on your journey, and we look forward to more conversations with you, and just wish you a lot of strength as you continue to push forward with pushing out more truth. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tara.